Everybody, welcome to MSP Confidential. I'm Luis Giraldo with ScalePad, and today I have the pleasure and privilege, honestly, of a very special guest. I flew all the way to Boston to get him. I had to surprise him in the middle of the night with an unexpected text, and I think I caught you, off guard, and you agreed to sit down with me for a chat. Thanks for being here, John.
Hey, I love surprises, man. It's great always to see an old friend.
Well, let's get right into it. You just had your earnings call yesterday. You're a finance guy, you're wearing a t-shirt, so maybe finance bro is a better term here. By the way, should we have Griffin give us some forward-looking statements here?
Yeah, with some type of disclaimer. Yeah, Griffin's our IR guy, but yeah, we should do a little disclaimer. Can you do that, a little disclaimer across the screen?
Yeah, maybe I'll throw it up before we go live with the thing. How did it go overall? What's your sentiment of how Wall Street is maybe evolving along with this big transformational shift that N-able seems to be going through?
Yeah, sure. So we reported our second quarter results, and I'd say they're all green on the screen. Wall Street likes to say red or green on the screen, and so it was green. We N-able exceeded our top line forecast and with the consensus what Wall Street thought we should do on our top line, our revenue, and also our bottom line. That's good. And we shared with them, we have a three-pronged approach to our strategy, and you can get into that in a little bit, but how we're doing and how we're progressing. So overall good. It's you're catching me in a good day because we can talk about this, Luis. We posted our results. Everything's out in the public domain. So fire away. We can go.
Well, I guess one of the things that I'm curious about because I think in the channel, we often talk about, the street doesn't really get MSPs.
Yeah.
They maybe don't understand the levers that are inside of the moving parts of the MSPs and so on. And so maybe they take a very topical or superficial approach to how they think of valuation or opportunity for the company. And they're obviously tracking some metrics, but that has limited view, I guess. And so I'm just curious if you think they get the underlying moving parts of the MSP market.
Yeah, good. So the quick short answer is it's improved quite a bit. But so a couple things. As a CEO or as a leader of any business or any team, frankly, you have to recognize and identify you have stakeholders, right? And it's almost a 360 view of the stakeholders. Like for us, we have our 25,000 managed service providers, they're stakeholders. We also have 600,000 small businesses that we're protecting, they're a stakeholder. We have our 1,800 employees, they're a stakeholder. We have the investment community, they're a stakeholder. And for me, the thing that I learned to be super critical as a leader is having a universal truth. And the same message that I can talk to an MSP that might be in Canada, that might be a small person shop, to a huge MSP that might be $1 billion organization, to my employees that we speak, I send a note out regularly once a week to them, to Wall Street. The key themes, the key messages need to be exactly the same. And so to make sure that you're messaging all that to the same stakeholder and that universal truth, I think it's imperative. And what it does, and starts with the mission, and it starts with the vision, and making sure that everything that we do prioritizes around that mission and vision. So that's one big part. So when I'm talking to Wall Street, I remind them of our mission. We're here to make sure that we're helping these MSPs, enabling them, pun intended, to drive their businesses forward, making sure that they're protecting their businesses. That's the message I carry on to my teams. And then from there, we break down the business and how that's performing. So that's one big part of it. The second part of it, there's a difference between Wall Street and Main Street. So Wall Street has really built their business in the way that they think in a vertical. They like to think this way.
Sure.
So the endpoint security market, the data protection market,
right,
the housing market,
lanes.
Swim lanes, right? Well, guess what? Main Street doesn't think that way. MSPs, managed service providers, they're not worried about endpoint security. They're not worried about...
It's much more horizontal. Yeah.
It's much more of a horizontal scope, right? It's more of like as Microsoft will talk, more like the graph, so to speak, right? It's going across. So Main Street cares about outcomes. My customers care about outcomes. And so what I had to communicate to the Wall Street and to the smart money types is you can't look at the business this way. You have to really look at the business as to the customer outcome, which, by the way, ties into that universal truth, because that is how I talk to customers.
Sure.
What I've been telling folks is, frankly, for MSPs, their companies don't really necessarily care, and make sure that you don't edit this whole part out because it needs to be the whole thing. They don't necessarily care about security. They care about business resiliency, not even security. They care about business continuity, business resiliency. And so my guidance to MSPs is stop talking to customers this way as well. Don't fall into the Wall Street trap. And so over the last couple of years, when I talk to Wall Street, I say, hey, here's what the MSPs are doing. Here's the expansion of the services that they're providing. Here's how sticky the MSP business is. Here's how the industry's matured. Here's what recurring revenue is. Wall Street and managed service providers, they have one thing in common for sure. They like recurring revenue, and they like businesses that can generate some cash. So that's part of the messaging.
So interesting, because the focus catch-up game that we're playing right now, I feel like even Enable is going through this, perhaps what your guys are calling a transformational shift.
Yep.
From being perhaps an RMM platform to now being a cybersecurity resiliency platform, and that's the terminology you're using. And MSPs kind of have also been moving a bit into this transformational shift themselves, but it's not always, lockstep necessarily. And so this is interesting to see how the ebbs and flows of the market sort of bring in the change, and MSPs, taking their time to figure out how are we going to do this. And so it's interesting if you can maybe observe or tell me a little bit about how you see a bit of this sort of market dynamics catching up and so on.
Yeah, and look, you're a domain expert, and you know this statement. It's almost like fingerprints. There's no two MSPs that are exactly alike,
so
right?
True, yeah.
And so folks are falling on this wide spectrum of where they are, right? Frankly, a lot of managed service providers are ahead of the vendors, to be frank, as to what their security needs are, what their compliance needs are. When we think about the multiple dimensions of resiliency, compliance also plays into it. And in some ways, vendors like Enable are catching up to some of the MSPs that are maybe in that top decile. And then there's that curve, right, that we've all seen where folks are still moving on. Look, what I tell folks is, a lot of our strategy is because we hope, our goal is to listen to what our managed service providers are facing with and dealing with, and hopefully what's matriculating down from the small and mid-market companies. Sure. So that big trend, this is not going to be a surprise to anyone, is security and security operations and IT operations, and the merging of those two. And we're actually here at Enable, we do our long range planning. You might have, I think you were one of our leaders that experienced one of those, and I call it the twin peaks of planning. So we do the long range planning. We say, hey, what do we believe is going to happen in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years? And it gets complicated sometimes. And me and my role, what I try to do is try to simplify some of the big themes.
Yeah, focus.
Yeah, and the two themes that I'm asking the team to focus on is we use words like IT operations and security and what the thrust is, but I had 20 very large MSPs in the room here in Boston last week, and I said, look, if my strategy and vision is not aligned with yours, then we're not going to grow together, because it is a partnership. And I said, I believe you folks need to focus on 2 words. Word number 1 is resiliency, and that has to do with your security posture, your data protection and the ability to recover, your compliance needs, your own internal teams continuity and business resilience. And the other word is experience. And experience, when you click into it, also has a wide array of bits. It can be DEX. It can be, how are we leveraging AI? What is the experience for your technicians? What is the experience for the customers? How can they self-serve? Yeah. And if you just focus on those 2 words, you're going to have a successful managed service provider business. And by the way, those 2 words are probably the same words 20 years ago. The subheadings,
the cycles, the cycles of things. Yeah.
But the subheadings have probably changed a little bit, right? Yeah. It's like AI, and I tell people, look, the nouns might change, but the verbs very much stay the same. Yeah. And if we focus as an industry on resilience, making
client impact, business outcomes,
resiliency, and then what is that experience both for your team and for the client that you're dealing with? We'll be off to something good. So I think that's a truism for Enable and for managed service providers, all over.
So look, let me challenge you a little bit, because
I'd be disappointed if you didn't.
MSPs are definitely obsessed about their tools, and I think it's no surprise that there's kind of a focus on the tech stack overall. And I think software companies, ourselves included, we need MSPs to be, in love with their tools to some extent.
Yep.
And so I think this is sort of an interesting come to Jesus moment that MSPs are having right now, because I'm seeing the conversation happening unfold in real time. It's like, we got to stop talking about tools. We got to start talking about outcomes. But these things are never a overnight change. Now, Enable, back from the days of Mike Cullen, you'll remember, and you love this about Enable, I love this about Enable, is so focused on the transformation that MSPs need to go through,
right,
and the education piece and so on. And it feels like the cybersecurity shift that you're going through is unlocking this other opportunity to double down on the education and get people really thinking about the outcomes and the impact and so on, because it's the challenge of our time, right? And so I'm just curious how you think about this education piece at large.
Sure. I mean, it's hopefully rooted in our name, Enable, right? And the one thing I like to intentionally kind of challenge or correct people on is I don't look at it as a transformation. I look at it as an evolution. And what I always say is like, you don't go from a caterpillar to a butterfly and the transformation is done.
There's no destination per se.
It's more of an evolution. And I have this allergic reaction to the term digital transformation that maybe you can help me take on and say it's digital evolution. But so look, so security is the center of a managed service provider's growth algorithm, and I love that word. I can see that smile already. And why do I say that? One is because and I see this now with our XDR offering as well. There's a lot of similarities. If your customer has an incident, even if it was because of improper hygiene on their end, you're going to be challenged potentially to keep that customer. So it starts with your retention part of the equation, number one. So if cyber hygiene for your customers and for you is paramount if you want to retain the customer, which is fundamental to any business that has recurring revenue. The second thing, it presents a tremendous growth opportunity. When MSPs look at their business, and I always ask MSPs about, okay, what's your I'm planning to grow 20% next year. Well, what does that growth algorithm look like? And 8 out of 10 times, I probably get this little kind of look of, what are you talking about? And part of that's like, hey, is it coming from new customers or your existing customers? And you need to do the math on where that's coming from. And what any business owner, and I know the MSPs know this, that are following your higher profit is by expanding your existing customer. It costs a lot of money to stand up a customer. You probably have a little negative J curve. You're probably not profitable when you land a first customer initially. But if you can expand from existing customers, add services to them, it's a much more profitable part of your growth algorithm. So that's the second part. And then the third part, that's a big way to differentiate, right? If you can walk in and with either a vulnerability scan or some type of diagnostic that you can take a look at and say, hey, here's how I can make you better. Let me help you. Let me be on the forefront and be your strategic advisor to help you navigate what is your compliance needs, or what is your security needs, or what the needs of your customers' needs might be.
Yeah. Focusing on that journey downstream, right, is such a different approach.
The downstream journey is like where I'd say the upper quartile, upper decile. When they start speaking that language, the customer's paying attention. They're walking into a bank. They're walking into a regional hospital. They're getting the CIO's attention, and so I think it's a key part, and leaning in on all things security, because it's real and the challenges are frankly ever changing, and it's a daunting task that will never go out of fashion, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think you're bringing up a good topic, which is this idea of good revenue and bad revenue, and I think MSPs are no strangers to bad revenue. I mean, many companies are no strangers to bad revenue. But in the M&A landscape, it seems like the industry still rewards a bit of buying bad revenue, because you still get these like $1, $2, $3 million MSPs that suddenly merge together, and now they're a $10 million MSP, and now their EBITDA multiplier went from 4x to 12x just for the sake of having more revenue, and that revenue they bought may not be that great.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious in your thoughts of how MSPs are thinking. Are they thinking enough about this idea of good revenue and retention, NDR, versus bad revenue?
Yeah. Look, the probably the most important metric of any recurring revenue business is their GRR, is their gross retention, right? And if you have revenue, I'll dispel, I'm not sure there's bad revenue if there's only bad revenue if there's no intent. And I'll give you an example. Some people, when they hear some of this stuff, they're like, oh, I need only recurring revenue, right? Well, you can have a special project, and that might be a one-time revenue stream. But if the intent or strategy is, hey, now I can wrap a service after that so that I can create recurring revenue, that special project revenue, that was good revenue. It led to the recurring revenue. It opened up a path for you, right? It's almost akin to in the software world, we might have a freemium model in some regard.
Maybe I'll clarify that, because I think in the MSP context, what I'm kind of imagining as bad revenue is that to some extent standardization maybe has been an enemy here, because we go out, we say, well, we want to deliver this service motion exactly the same for all our customers. And then the lower maturity customers or the lower appetite customers, you kind of hit a brick wall and you kind of capitulate to their not wanting to engage. And then they become sort of this drag on service. They become this drag on the opportunity to grow. And that's, I think, what I call bad revenue.
Sorry. So you're spot on, right? So, and I hear this quite a bit. I actually heard it last week, where the topic of firing customers came up, right? And so I think a couple things. Like I call it my holy triangle, right? And that holy triangle is first, MSPs need to standardize, then they need to automate, and then they need to augment. And you have to almost kind of do things in that certain order, because it's tough to automate if you haven't standardized. And by standardizing, people sometimes misunderstand and say, you don't need to have a one size fits all. But where MSPs get into trouble is if everything gets too bespoke. And you all know, and you've known it too, you have that small customer that is very bespoke, that is probably your loudest, your chattiest. They're banging on your support the most, and one, they haven't subscribed to that. So MSPs need to dictate. Mike Cullen, you mentioned Mike Cullen, rest in peace, Mike. His big thing was like, hey, MSP shouldn't be selling, they should be telling. And they're the expert, and if they can standardize, now they can drive more of a profitable bit. But 100%, there are customers that drain your support. They're not listening to the advice that you're giving them. They're probably in an unprofitable business, and you are better to cut those customers free. 100%. You'll have a better staff retention because they won't be driving your teams crazy. You'll have a better gross margin and ultimately better profit. And now guess what? There's also opportunity cost, Luis. So 100%. Now, it sounds nice. You need to have the discipline, but you also need to have the ability to actually say which customers are not profitable. So it's not. I would look at who's bespoke, who's not agreeing to your stack. And then look at the support tickets, look at all these other bits, and then make the hard decision. But pruning is not a bad thing, I would say, in the business.
So you just opened the door to talk about discipline, which has been something I've been super interested to ask you about. In your investor decks and in a lot of the things that you talk about sort of a disciplined approach to the finance model of the company. What does that mean in the context of your investors and shareholders?
Sure, and I think this is super analogous for managed service providers as well. So when the go-go times, when it was free money, right? When interest rates were basically zero, right? Not too long ago, there was this, what was in vogue was growth at all costs. And that fostered a bunch of bad behavior, I'd say, mostly in the software industry. And what do I mean by bad behavior? People basically buying business a lot of times. People would almost, give me, sign up for a $100,000 contract and I'll give you $100,000 of advertising or $300,000 of advertising.
Just to show the bookings.
It's just to show the bookings and more vanity metrics. So when we talk about a disciplined approach, what we talk to, and I think this is true for managed service providers as well, we refer to it as the rule of. And our rule of is we want growth. So you take your growth number, your revenue year over year, whatever percentage that is, and you add it to your profit, your EBITDA number. And good software businesses, I see software businesses that are in the upper quartile, you put those two numbers together and that number equals 40. We want to be better than good. We'd like to be great, and we'd like to get that number to 45 or 50. And people always ask me, well, which one's more important? And
they work together.
They work hand in hand. I'm more growth oriented though. I put more of a lean on the growth. I want us to grow our businesses. I'm sure managed service providers want to grow their businesses. But what it really speaks to is make sure what we're doing has the right unit economics. Make sure it has durable growth and durable profitability. And this goes back to some of the things we were just talking about, where you might have a customer that is not profitable for you. And so, we do say no to a certain business sometimes. We do say no to doing certain events or certain types of marketing bits because we don't really believe that it's in the best interest of our business or our shareholders or the customers. I think naming stadiums or whatever might be not necessarily in the best interest of the MSPs. I'd rather put that money in product and rather put that money in support. And so I think that's where the discipline comes in. And I also believe that businesses should be profitable.
I thought you were a soccer player, not a boxer.
Is that too much? No, I was trying to be cool. I am a soccer player, but I think so. It really speaks to how do we balance growth with profit and look at the long term with the long term arc to make sure we can do things in a disciplined manner.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe the challenge MSPs are going through, that you might think of a customer that's a draw or drag on your business as something you need to fire, but at the same time, there's sort of this acknowledgement or recognition that maybe we still don't have the right processes in place, from a customer success perspective. Like, have we done everything we could do to make sure that we have exhausted the possibilities before we say goodbye to the revenue that we want to keep, obviously. And this I always struggle with this. Like, who am I to tell MSP they should fire a customer, right? Because revenue is revenue, and there's good times and bad times.
No, you're touching on a really cool, so when I say the word experience, some of that has to be internal, kind of navel gazing for a second. Like, what are we doing can we streamline the experience? So maybe what we perceive as a customer that's not profitable might be actually profitable. One of the things I've been saying recently to my team is as you scale, as businesses scale, and as these managed service providers scale, you might run into a situation where the parts are all doing their job, but the sum of the parts might not be doing their job. Yeah. And what then you end up having is maybe a foregone conclusion that might be wrong. Oh, that customer's not profitable. Well, have we educated them? Have we thought about maybe putting them into a little bit more of a bit? Can we get them into more of a healthier state? Can we evangelize and get them there? Sometimes the answer might be no, but then also, what can we be doing to automate? Back to my triangle. What can we be doing to automate our processes? Yeah. What can we be doing to augment? I don't think MSPs think about the augment word enough. They almost feel like it's like a badge of honor. Engineers, good technical people, they want to build everything themselves. It's a not invented here. It's a not invented here kind of mindset. Yeah. And where we're heading to, for me, it's more about augmenting in some of these bits. And then you can take a look at the dynamics and economics and say, hey, actually they can be a profitable customer. It's not bad revenue that we should fire. We might be able to grow it and go from there.
Yeah, so good. I think this focus on getting back into the client impact side of things, getting customers to talk about their goals and really aligning services to that is really the big shift we're seeing. And this is where also ScalePad is focusing a lot of its work, is can we help them actually put the client back front and center? Because the thing for 20 years has been, MSPs have been beat over the head about the standardization, and now the commoditization of the market is kind of driving this race to the bottom. I think it's a game that maybe everybody kind of falls trapped to at some point. It's like, oh, this is what everybody else is doing, let's go do that. What would you say to MSPs that are maybe stuck in a bit of this race to the bottom? And the challenge being, of course, that the barrier to entry is so low. And this is the thing, like, if you look at SaaS, like a bad SaaS company, meaning a product that doesn't have good market fit or is not delivering good outcomes, is gonna die. But in the IT world, the baseline for what is good or what is acceptable is so low today, I think.
Yeah. Look, I kind of think it's bullshit, right? And what I mean by that is, I have the blessing to talk to MSPs from all over the globe, all different sizes, and inevitably we get into hey, how are you charging? And so I hear things as low as $20 per user per month, $17 per user per month, to as high as $400 or $1,500 per user per month. And so how can one shop command so little and have this race to the bottom while other shops are commanding this premium? Is it a premium, or is there real value that's being provided? And I would argue there's real value that's being provided. So where an MSP really goes from the maintenance man or person that's just keeping the lights on to helping a small, medium, or mid-market business actually drive their business forward, that's where the value difference is. And so where I talk, I have a little bit of a bias where the MSPs that have a little bit more of a vertical focus can drive a little bit more of that value. So and you don't need to focus on one particular industry, but I'll give you an example. if you have a cluster or a concentration of legal firms that you're advising, you can now speak their lingo. You can now help them with their documentation bits, things that are a little bit more bespoke. The medical field, the same thing. And when you walk into that proprietor or that CEO of that business speaking their language, I met at a pub with an MSP in Scotland, in the UK, in England, and they stumbled upon the window industry, not Windows, Microsoft, like the window industry in the middle of England. And they became an expert, and they understood the reseller lingo, the wholesale lingo, they understood all the vernacular around these windows. And as a result, they built a very profitable scaling business in the middle of England because they understood the whole ecosystem. And when anyone in that ecosystem said, hey, I need help with my security, or I need help with my operations. I didn't say IT, I didn't say the wireless access point, but the operations, they said, I have a guy for you. Because they understood the business, they understood the domain and the lingo, and then they could command a premium, and they're gonna be that trusted advisor. It goes back to those two words. If you're a trusted advisor that has a technology lens, because at the end of the day, everything needs technology. That's where you can drive that bit, and that's how you avoid this race to the bottom.
But levels, right? Because I think the interesting thing is everybody tells the story, then they gloss over the entire evolution that they went through before they were like a verticalized and specialized window IT provider. And so the interesting challenge is like you get started, the barrier is low, you take business from any industry or vertical you can get. And it's tough to cycle out of that, and very few, have the discipline and the focus to really say, see an opportunity, see around the corner, be like, we're going to focus on that because we see the thing. So what
I would say though, just to add, so you're complete. I would say 8 out of 10 of those stories were what I call emerging strategies. In other words, it wasn't it wasn't a deliberate strategy, and so they were. But my message to everyone is, the opportunity's there. Pay attention to it. Take a step back. So, hey, I have John. Hey, that sounds great. I have customers all over the joint. Do you? Why don't you analyze where your revenue's coming from? Do you have a geographical focus? It might be right under your nose. And so these folks that had it was like penicillin, man. They weren't planning on making penicillin. It was completely emerging, but they had the wherewithal to recognize that they had something. And my bet is, in most of the customer bases of MSPs, they have that same opportunity that they can differentiate if they kind of peel the onion back and go for it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's so interesting. This is what I love about this conversation is sort of the ability to go back and forth on this. And I'm not debating you by any stretch. I'm like, it sounds like we're agreeing on all of these things.
100%.
It's just the cycles and the reality of like, I'll mention that like on the investor earnings call yesterday, one of the things that one of the analysts asked about is what percentage of your customers are above that 50K range. And I thought that was an interesting question because I guess it signals a couple things. Maybe it signals retention, it signals a number of other things that perhaps you guys track. But what I think is interesting about that number is just the maturity that comes naturally with a larger IT provider. But there's still a large percentage of MSPs that, the average staff size is 7 or 8 or 9 people. And so this is, I guess, one of those ebbs and flows that I talk about. It's easy to look at it through the lens of the really successful, very focused and disciplined MSPs, but not realizing 90% of the market is these much more immature, and not by their own fault, it's just the size of business can't support, a rigorous financial process and so on. But, your thoughts on this sort of getting to that place faster.
Sure, and by the way, and then there's also different goals too, right? Like, I speak to a good number of MSPs, and I don't mean this with any type of negative derogatory type of, it's like a lifestyle business. They're, hey John, you know what? I've got my 4 or 5 technicians. I have my customers. I'm making a certain amount of profit every year, and I have a good life-work balance, and that's okay. I salute those folks as well. And by the way, thanks for listening to the earnings call. I'm glad you listened to it. But yeah, so we talk about that 50K. Look, a couple things. I've been in the industry for 13 years. And I know you've been in the industry for quite a long time as well. I think we both recognize the level of maturity that's happening in the space. It's wild, right? I mean, MSPs, I was speaking to an MSP, they're part of a $4 billion company, right? And they're running a 900-person MSP inside of a bigger IT stack and all these other bits. And what that means is managed service providers are walking into Fortune 1000 companies now. And that's opening up the market and TAM for all of us, not just those big dudes, but also for the smaller dudes, because it has like almost a virality kind of effect as we go through. But look, for us, and I know this is going to sound cliche, every MSP is important, because even if you're a 2 or 3 person shop with managing 500 devices,
the growth opportunity.
The growth opportunity, and now with the acquisition of Adlumin, our tech stack is so broad that if those smaller shops, by and large, a smaller shop has more of a pressure to not have a vendor sprawl. If you're a 500 person shop, you have a person for that. You have a person for that, right? But so vendor sprawl is probably not as of an imperative problem if you're a bigger shop. If you're a smaller shop and you're trying to deal with 17, 18 different vendors in a tech stack, that by itself becomes a job. And so for these smaller shops, our message is, hey, we can be that one-stop shop, partnering with companies like ScalePad, of course, but there's other bits, there's certain things that we do that we claim, hey, look, we want to be best in class. And there's other shops like ScalePad that we're saying, hey, our open ecoverse, we want to integrate and push it through to minimize the friction for your tech stack. But for those smaller shops, Luis, frankly, we have a lot of MSPs that give us over $100,000 a year, where their revenue might be only $2 or $3 million because they've standardized and we've helped them gain more efficiencies through our programs, our business programs, but also through our technologies. Because especially for the smaller shops, it's a lot more efficiencies to be had if you're not having that vendor sprawl. So there's a big opportunity in the large side, but frankly, we have over 10,000 MSPs that are smaller that are significant to us because they've become an enabled shop, so to speak.
Yeah. So you mentioned Adlumin, and I think the obvious thing is the shift to this cybersecurity story and all that. But I wonder if you could take me back to before this was the reality. How were you maybe thinking about the future of RMM? Because there must have been an inflection point to be like, this is why we have to do the Adlumin thing or a security thing. But I'm just curious, sort of what was the message in the room around RMM?
Sure. Yeah. So like one phrase kind of keeps popping up, and that phrase is control plane, right? And so the RMM. And frankly, I didn't get this joke for a little while, if I'm being honest. But and just watching how MSPs operate and the verbs that the RMM allows MSPs to do, it very much is the control plane. We all know it can, a good RMM or UEM can take control of a device, the patching, the automation. But what about the automation and the scripting, the IT ops part of the equation? Sure. And then of course there's the whole dimension of provisioning software. So it's very much the control plane, and I think that's where we've evolved our thought. Is for us is the RMM is this control plane. It is the centerpiece for technicians to actually go carry out in the execution. And I know the PSA is important, and I look at the PSA as like the arms sometimes. Like that's okay, we're grabbing in the tickets and we're understanding the routing for the technician, but the RMM is very much the legs. It is the engine that is the core, and it partners with a bunch of other things to do that job a lot more efficiently. But if we do our job right, the RMM or the UEM is the centerpiece for these folks. We partner with other vendors. We're driving a lot more automation. So if I use my analogy with the legs, it's a turbocharged or a robotic type of legs that your team is, or like an e-bike, that your team can do a lot more with. And so that's where I think it's where we're evolving it to. It's the control plane, and it's the security kind of control plane as we move that agenda forward. I've been taught. A well-managed device is a secure device, and a secure device is a well-managed device. So they go hand in glove, and I think the industry initially, and I'd say us, we kind of stopped at the ability to take control and writing some scripts on monitoring capabilities, and but for us, it's really becoming that control plane that is the foundational layer on the security part.
And not long ago, I think N-Central would have been referred to as your flagship product, perhaps is the best way I can describe it. And so maybe that view has changed dramatically now in the context of cybersecurity resilience platform.
Yeah, so look, N-Central is still very much, I call it a cornerstone. right? It's a cornerstone, but I really look at it as that foundational layer that we can go do all these other bits. We have the integrations with Cove, our data protection offering. We have the integrations with Lumen, and we're just adding services. For me, the world has changed, right? It's less about a monolithic stack of code that's a product, and it's more about a platform that you can deliver microservices
Absolutely,
on.
yeah.
And so, for example, we added vulnerability management for the endpoint inside N-central. That's a microservices, cloud-based microservice that now it shows up in the dashboard. Like all these words need to change, right? So it's a microservice. Now folks can do patching and vuln assessment all in one spot, and then our next iteration will be the network next year, and then cloud beyond there. But it's bringing in all these microservices to N-central, not the RMM, but N-central, this control plane that now we can go, same thing with EDR, right? We partner with EDR. You can go deploy and provision from this control plane, but you're doing endpoint detection and response via that control plane. And so for me, it's an evolution of how folks need to think about their platform, their anchor platform.
Well, you're a segue master because you keep dropping the little little things that are were literally my next topic. And so you talked about Cove, and you mentioned your LRP a little while back. The one that I had sort of the privilege of joining 4 years ago. Incredible how much time passes. But there was a very intentional decision to move Cove from outside of sort of the Enable umbrella per se, and kind of rebrand it as its own product. And I've heard Stefan Voss, who I saw earlier this morning, joke that it's like, and Chris Gruda said this too, it's like the industry's best kept secret, Cove was. But I think some of the commentary on the earnings call yesterday was that Cove growth has been really, really good. And I'm curious to ask you about this transformation for Cove from a purely branding perspective, and what has that meant for the product and so on.
Sure. So we spun out in 2021, and one of the first initiatives we called it bringing backup to the front. Cove, our backup offering, is great technology, and we were calling it really. It was more like Enable Backup, and it was more of a cross sell. Yeah. We brought in some great leaders. So Stefan Voss is our head of product, who's been with us probably for 4 years. And he came from Dell's data protection business, right? And a big enterprise, one of the best in class. And he looked at Cove and its capabilities, and he said, hey guys, you have a gem here. This is architected in a way that's just disruptive, and it's technologically a disruptive piece of technology here. Let's add a couple of things.
Yeah. And nobody knows about it.
And nobody knows about it. So it was one of those aha moments. So we rebranded as Cove, gave it its own lane, put more of an effort to it. And we have over 11,000 MSPs that use it. It's actually our biggest revenue source, Luis. So it's a couple $100 million revenue source for Enable. And frankly, whether it's like Canalys or Gartner or whatever, it's showing up historically and repeatedly in the champions quadrant. It's disruptively better. And the reason why, it goes back to the experience and the resiliency. So the common story, I'm an MSP, 4 of my technicians are babysitting my backups, and I have multiple backups. And they went to Cove, that 4 went down to a half of a technician, a half of an FTE, because it's one platform. You can do your workstations, your servers, your VMs, your M365, all in one platform, and the algorithm is so efficient that you're not babysitting this thing anymore. Yeah. And so you can get out of the basement, so to speak, and get back into the boardroom, so you can start delivering some of these services. And so we're psyched about it. The team is adding a bunch of bits. They're adding more of a DRAS type of component in the not so distant future. That's not a commitment or a promise under your disclaimer bit.
Forward-looking statements.
Forward-looking statements. But and we're excited about where it's heading, and the key thing is the experience and the team. Chris Groot is our general manager. He's been in the industry for like 15, 20 years. He was actually one of the original founders, and Stefan, and they're laser focused on the experience for the MSPs. So it's been a great success story.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's one of those 3 legs of the stool of the cyber resiliency platform, and of course that last line of defense. So speaking again of resiliency, and maybe I want to abstract the topic of resiliency away from the IT industry for a second, because you've been into soccer a long time. You coach soccer, and I think one of the things that's interesting about soccer is just how much repetition you have to do with the drills, and you're kind of just creating a habit that will show up in the moments of difficulty, so that this is exactly the point. Enable was probably one of the first companies in sort of the big name MSP vendor space that I heard talking about tabletop exercises, for example. And Dave Maxout, I love the guy. He's just such a powerhouse. And so I just wanted to ask you a little about your personal view on resiliency through the lens of maybe soccer even.
Yeah, sure.
And how you bring maybe some of that into the team here at Enable.
Sure. So a couple things. So a CEO I used to work with many moons ago, he would always say, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer, right? And so I took that to heart. And so you need to develop certain muscle memory where it really is patterns that really are muscle memory. So with soccer, I have 4 kids, and they're kind of they've actually aged out now. I'm sad to say, where they're too good for me. I can't coach them anymore. But a lot of the drills that you would do it's just the repetition and receiving a ball and turning and doing a certain technique. Why? So that you don't have to think about it. And so what we do here is a lot of that. And to quote the famous philosopher Michael Tyson, who's also known Mike Tyson.
Yeah, everybody has a plan.
Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And we do the tabletops and some of these other bits so that you actually, not that you're not thinking, but that you've built in the muscle memory that you're just reacting as you've been trained, right? That's what the Navy SEALs have done. That's what so any great organization has to build the repetition. And I think that's true. I think that's also why standardizing the process and testing the process. So we do tabletops multiple times a year. We actually do tabletops for MSPs. We punch ourselves in the mouth, or we punch the MSP in the mouth, and we say, okay, how are you going to respond? And it's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to unearth and expose some of the
How do you feel
cracks
when this is going to happen, right?
And the cracks and the gaps, so that when it's go time, you know how to operate. And I think that's part of the bits. And I think as from an operator, if you're a business owner, it's okay, what are the processes that we need to test and tried and true, and then and really savor the fact that you've exposed some cracks and you exposed some errors. That's where all the goodness lies, is okay, we learned something, and it's the famous, I'm throwing a lot of quotes at you, but it's the famous like Nelson Mandela line, we either win or we learn. But in the move the agenda forward, it's in the learnings that help that. But you only do that by putting the training in, whether it's on the pitch or in the boardroom, or in an IT lab.
Yeah. I'm a walking quote tool, by the way. I'm constantly.
These dads, the dad thing.
Yeah, it's a dad thing.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. The whole process of resiliency is interesting. I heard this great teacher, Dr. Becky Good. I think she was giving a university level lecture on resiliency, and the observation that was being made in this classroom, it was kind of this open conversation, was that it's maybe counterintuitive that the process of becoming resilient doesn't actually feel that great.
Yeah, I think I saw the same video.
And we have this tendency to chase, the things that feel good, or this feels great, let's continue down this path. But building resiliency, which is the whole point of like getting punched in the mouth, it has to feel a little awkward, and this is where kind of resiliency kind of comes out to play a role. So I think that's always interesting. Struggling well is one of the things that Ray Dalio talks about in one of his books, which I love so much.
We talked offline about like certain things that are hot. So this is a perfect segue if you don't mind. I'm reading this book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, I think, and actually it's a very similar construct where there's 2 mindsets. There's a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, and we all trip back and forth into one or the other, right? But the fixed mindset has the view that I'm not going to improve. I don't have the ability to improve. I can't be a better soccer player, football player. I can't be a better IT technician. I can't be a better business owner or CEO. And then the growth mindset is, I'm going to put my effort in, and I'm going to focus on the effort. And there is an ability to improve, and I'm going to learn that. And I think part of it is if you shift more toward a growth mindset, then you're okay on the setback, because it's more about the journey than the destination. And we've got kids, and one of the things I always tell my kids, it's like, it's really very much about the journey and what are you going to learn, and put in the effort. Focus on the effort, not necessarily on the outcome. And don't judge yourself on the outcome, judge yourself on the effort. If you built everything you did, you prepared, you put in the work, you put in the plan to land that new customer, and you truly put in that effort and you didn't get the outcome, what can you learn from it and drive the better bit? It's not say, hey, I'm a loser, and focus on the outcome. And so I think it very much goes into that. If you can shift the feeling into, hey, it's the experience and the growth mindset, then I think the learnings and the ultimate outcomes kind of fall out. It's pick your favorite sport, your best athlete, they'll all tell you the same thing. It's not what you've seen as the finished product, right? No one ever saw the first draft of the essay, the novel, or the book, right? They only see the finished product.
It's the consistency, yeah. Well, let me add one variable to effort, and so I can get your thoughts on this. And the variable is focus. And on Monday, I got to see John C. Maxwell deliver a keynote where he was talking a little bit about, he gave this story. Hey, you're out in your yard and you need to, cut down a tree. And you can go, start whacking at the one tree, and then, oh, there's another tree, and start whacking that one. Oh, there's another one. And you kind of, the distraction or the lack of focus, you might never get around to actually whacking down any tree. There's just, all beat up at some point, but never got any of them done. And so this is something that I feel is uniquely parallel to the lives of MSPs in that they're so overloaded and distracted and shiny object syndrome and all these things that the mindset of focus is so critical to actually getting effort to mean something. And I'm just curious, how you think about focus in that sense.
Yeah, the shiny toy syndrome is real. I've got a friend, I think, who actually has that backyard, by the way, that with partial trees and mounds of mulch. But anyway, I think we all have some of those friends. Look, I think it's the best way for us here at Enable, and even in my personal life, state your goals, state your North Star. And it's having a little bit more of a structure and discipline as to more of that strategic planning bit, right? So state your mission, state your North Star, state the 2 to 3 pillars that you want to do, and then break each one of those big bits into milestones that are digestible that you can move them through. And measure. Folks feel that it feels like it's heavy or bureaucratic. No, we measure so we can manage. And I think that's how you can drive the focus, and breaking it down into milestones. Celebrate the milestones, by the way. Recognize some of the bits, and then have the discipline to say, hey, these are not in my top priority list. Shit happens, things can change, but if you do that, say, okay, something has to come down, something has to come off of those top 3 or top 5 initiatives and be replaced with this, or else you're gonna end up being looking like that hamster in the wheel. So be explicit, state your goals, state them for your whole company.
Yeah.
Put them on the fridge in the office. Make folks know about it. Again, that repetition part, and then measure. And then the other part that I learned as a leader is you need to keep repeating the message. On average, it takes someone 7 times before they really really understand or receive it in, right? And so sometimes as business leaders or someone that's on the go. But I told the team that you did, but you need to tell them 6 more times in different ways, because everyone has a different way of learning. Sure. It could be a video, it could be a book to suggest, or it could be an email, or it could be a kick in the ass. But you need to find those different ways to connect and make sure that your message is received. And then you can't, as a leader, keep shifting these goals, or else you'll whiplash the organization. And that's probably the most devastating thing folks can do, is thrash their teams.
So you mentioned metrics, and I think this is an interesting one where people who figure out, how to make the metrics work for them, kind of gloss over their history and evolution through the transitions of metrics.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to ask you, what have you learned about metrics?
Yeah.
I think in the context of obviously a growing public company and stuff like that, but also in the purview of MSPs, and you talk to a lot of them.
Yeah, so look, super dangerous because if you pick a metric, why are you picking a metric? You're trying to measure and drive a behavior. And when you do so, you really have to measure the behavior that metric is driving. And so some of the dirtiest words that I've learned in business is vanity metric. And I fell victim to this many times. And it's not intended to be a vanity metric on the outset. You think you're picking a metric. I'll give you an example.
To get to your goal or whatever. Yeah.
To get you your goal. We want to grow the business. Okay, what's the metric? All right, the metric is number of customers. Okay, that's the metric? Sure. Well, what could happen? Hey, John, we have 200% of the customers that we hit the goal, but guess what? Back to the conversation we were having earlier, they maybe not be the customers that we want.
Yeah,
they may be non-profitable, right? And they're going to create a leaky bucket, or, oh shit, that's not the metric. Well, what do we want? We want healthy types of, okay, how do we define that? So Look, it's an iterative process. It's a learning process, but I would say be very mindful of, okay, what will this behavior change? And for those of the folks that have salespeople, driving a comp plan that wants to drive the right sales behavior, but that's true for every function. What is the behavior you want to drive? Yeah. And if it's not aligned with the top message, then that's where the trouble is built. So as an organization, you want to make sure that there's vertical and horizontal alignment. And so if by horizontal alignment, if what a function might be doing or a team might be doing or an individual might be doing doesn't line up perfectly with the other organizational functions or the main goal, you're running the risk of vanity metric. And so I probably fall into that trap every year. And we try to get better and really try to assess, hey, are we going to drive some type of vanity metric? But inevitably they'll pop out, and it's okay. Course correct, and then learn from there.
And I think one of those interesting vanity metrics is maybe MRR per customer, right? I think it's something. One of the things that we look at is like, oh yeah, our average MRR is this number, and as it maybe inches up, you kind of feel proud of the team or whatever. But one of the interesting things, and we talked about this, 4 years ago, as I embarked on this interesting reimagining of segmentation to a certain extent when I was here, which was this idea of like, what are the traits, characteristics, opportunities, what is the growth that this MSP is experiencing that we don't know about, so that we can focus some of the conversations. And I think this has kind of driven a bit of what you call a moat in the investor documents, that is your customer success plan. Because you're looking at all these different dynamics and parts of the growth algorithm of MSPs and helping understand that stuff better for the team internally. But tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so look, we have 25,000 MSPs, and we just talked about earlier, it's like fingerprints, right? So our challenge is recognizing that wide array of fingerprints that we might have, and not treating all the MSPs the same way, because they're all in a different spot of their journey. So by definition, you have to try to segment in one way or the other. And I think this is applicable for any business that has a customer base that's more than like 10, we'll say, right? Where it can't be a bespoke experience. So then what do you try to do? You try to find the attributes that matter, which goes back to the vanity metrics. And for us, we've done this wrong a couple of ways. The first way we started, I can give trade secrets, but it's okay. The first way we started was like, well, what is the revenue that this MSP is giving to us? Well, that's a vanity metric, because an MSP might be a small shop that is already using all of the enabled products, but then you might have a huge MSP that might be just using one of our products, our password management, Passportal product.
We're on a proof of concept, spending $200 a month.
And we're not touching or treating those customers the right way. So we look at the short answer is we try to find a couple of key attributes that help us try to better understand where the customers are on their journey. So number of employees is one way. If there's a vertical that they're focused on, what type of level of complexity of service that they're offering. And then we try to effectively put them, map them on an X and Y, sometimes Z, type of dimension to understand them. Why? So we can better service them, right? And that lifestyle guy that we spoke about, okay, let's understand his needs, make sure that his needs are gross retention. He's not he just wants to make sure he's retaining those customers. Great. This other guy, he's potentially looking at building a SOC, or this third person, they're looking at M&A. What are the attributes and how can we help them on their journey? Because the cool thing about our business model, I call it good, clean living, is we grow as these customers grow. And there's different dimensions on how they grow. And so to understand, that starts with using these things, to understand how the customer is going to hit their goal, then it puts us in a better spot. So we try to segment, and it also gives us better ways that we can touch them. We also try to, I think it's also important, a lot of the things that we do, and Robert Wilburn and Chris Massey have done this in a masterful way, is when we do events, we try to do smaller events at Enable compared to some of our competitors. And we try to bring similarly situated folks in the room around a round table, dudes that are 50 million to 75 million, or dudes that are 2 million to 5 million, or dudettes, it doesn't matter, right? And or folks that have maybe more of a security angle, or maybe folks that have a medical angle, so that they can start brainstorming and collaborate and drive an agenda that's a little bit more unique to what their segment might need.
Yeah. Well, speaking of David or Robert and Chris Massey, one of the things that's maybe a little newer to Enable is actually doing the peer groups, and these kind of were born out of this bet that Robert had on the business transformation project. Yeah. And so, how has the peer group thing maybe influenced a bit of how you think? From the SaaS vendor perspective,
it's I'm going to butcher the expression, but I saw some quote where it's like 1 day with a room full of your customers is the equivalent of like 6 months, like in your offices or something like that. So for us, we had, like I mentioned earlier, we had like 20 folks in the Boston office right down the hall last week, and I told them, I said, hey, they were very appreciative because it's not a pitch. We're not there to sell them stuff. We got them in the room. We give them a couple of agenda items. We'll bring in some outside experts.
Yeah, and let them go.
And it's like, discuss. and I said, hey, look, thank you. Because selfishly, we learn as a vendor and as a partner so much from just being part of the conversation, because every one of us has a preconceived idea as to how a problem might want to be solved. And there's probably many ways to solve it. But inevitably, it's probably the one or two best ways. And so to get the great minds in the room, that moves our agenda forward. So it's been great selfishly because it helps us move our roadmaps forward. They're very transparent as to what we're doing right, what we're not doing right, but also what the vendor community's doing right and what they're not doing right. I'm happy to click there. And then it's getting them in the room and they're helping one another kind of solve their problems. So it's been a wild success. And then they leave there saying, hey, look, Enable is really vested in my long-term bit. They're not asking me to buy something. They're really, and we mean it. It's very much a long-term value arc, and it's also our way. You can't be an industry leader without being mindful of try to elevate the entire industry, right? Our teams are working on an AI project right now. I'm not sure if you're aware of, but so we're trying to elevate the way folks are together leveraging AI. That's not an Enable thing; it's an industry thing. And ScalePad and Enable are leading some of that initiative. And so
Nicole, right?
Yeah, she's fantastic. To elevate the industry, of course, there's going to be benefit for Enable, but it's more about elevating the industry so that we can move the agenda forward.
Yeah, those standards, a bit of that view, consolidated view, especially in an ecoverse, as you talk about, where we need to be able to exchange information so freely. I think the MCP stuff will be a really, game changer for how the AI agents and all the agentic stuff is talking to each other. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your view on the changing dynamics of like the globalization of our world. MSPs, kind of the pandemic drove them to remote thing and distributed cultures, but mostly fairly geo-localized, at a country level at the worst. Some very large shops, obviously. Enable has 15 offices across the world, something crazy like that.
That's about right.
How do you think about bridging, cultural gaps? And I know Kathleen is a very talented, HR leader, people leader, but this must be something that crosses your mind.
Yeah, and so I was in Manila at the beginning of the year, and it was great. We have a couple hundred folks in Manila.
What is your karaoke choice?
I don't know, man. Some of the Top Gun stuff is kind of like my go-to. I'm not a good singer at all, but by the way, they're big in karaoke. And also, we took a lot of pictures, but it was great. Awesome team, and they have such a customer. So it's a good example. They have such a customer service forward gene and a culture. They're always customer first, and which is great. And that's an attribute that we want to carry. My message to them, just to give you an example, is I want you to bring your local culture in. And augment that your local culture and augment the Enable global culture, but I need you to also embrace the global culture and augment it, embrace it. So I look at culture, I refer to it as a quilt, right? And we're pulling fabric from all these different cultures and backgrounds. By the way, that can be geography and country. It also can be companies. As you know, we're a collection of startups, right? We are a collection of startups, and so I refer to that quilt because that fabric makes it much more of a stronger bit. But there's a double-edged kind of responsibility. One, you need to embrace the other fabric, but two, you need to bring your fabric. And so for the folks in Manila, I said, I don't want you just to accept. If someone in North America or Europe is telling that you might culture, they're my boss. They're The culture we have here at Enable is I need you to challenge. I need you to think for yourself, and I need you to break glass. And so where maybe culturally certain countries, oh, well, my boss said I'd have to be, I said obedience is not an attribute that we're looking for here at Enable. So it's giving folks the freedom to build their own purple, what we call the purple and black culture. But bring your culture to that. Bring that culture to augment, to make that new quilt. And I think as companies scale, it's important we acquired Illumin, and I said, hey, look, new quilt now. That doesn't mean, hey, no, we have enough fabric. No, we now need to bring that at Illumin. I call it my security fabric into our quilt, and make sure that they feel that they're leaving their fingerprints, their imprint on this new quilt. And I think it's important. Companies, MSPs are going through M&A all the time.
Yeah.
MSPs are growing, and if it's that classic expression, what got you here won't get you there. A lot of that's the culture, and are you embracing the new culture? And if it's, we acquired a company and they're going to do everything our way,
good luck.
It's a death toll. No one wants to be told what to do. They want to be heard and understood, and there will be a little bit of a give and take, but you need to have that mindset of making a new quilt.
Well, in the spirit of the shifting quilt patches, so to speak, I think one of the interesting pieces of fabric that is so obvious that has changed, and we talked a lot about the cybersecurity journey, but is Vikram in the CMO role, kind of leading a bit of the outside narrative and maybe the guidance internally on like how we need to be talking about it, thinking about it, and tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so Vikram Ramesh, he's our new CMO, and he had leadership roles and CMO roles at Mandiant, at Google, most notably or recently at Lumen. And honestly, he's bringing a level of thoughtfulness on how all these bits come together. Like what I like about Vikram is he comes from an engineering background,
right.
And so his first question is, hey, how do these solutions come together to make it a proper, more cyber resilient bit? He's not worried about how it's going to look on a billboard. He first starts with the solution and what the outcome is, and he has honestly, it's impressive because he's approaching it more from the engineer mindset. And hey, if it is all about cyber resilience, and how can Cove and Illumin work better together? How can patching and Cove and Illumin work better together? And he's very much positioning us for this complete cyber resilience play. He was at Black Hat this week, and that story is resonating not just in the MSPs but also in the mid market as well, because it is very much left
connected to the right things.
It's left hand, right hand clapping. Yeah. So he's introduced, I'd say, a level of thoughtfulness, and which will, I think, push us, make us a little uncomfortable, and push us on more of the forefront on the cyber resilience front. You're seeing larger companies, Rubrik and some of these other data protection businesses, they're now making either partnerships or claims about cybersecurity, but it's partnerships. We have the benefit here at Enable. It's all of our IP. We have the best-in-class data protection offering. We have a best-in-class XDR. We have a best-in-class UEM. Having that workflow, opening up those APIs, and creating a better, more of a platform experience, we think it's a winning solution for these folks. And hey, if you want 2 out of those 3 things, and you want to bring in a third party, that's cool too. We'll make sure that we don't stand in your way, and make sure that the workflows continue to work that way. So,
the mindset shift, you talked about this book, and you study, and maybe mindset is the thing that you're learning or evolving a little bit. And I think with the shift of the market, the cybersecurity focus, there's so many things that people can be focused on, but to abstract the actual topic or a thing of the day, maybe what is a trait or characteristic of an MSP, leader, operator, that maybe helps them better adjust to the changing tides of things like that?
You kind of touched on it a little bit. Like, so for me, attributes that I look for, and I think when I see these MSPs that are really in that upper decile, upper quartile, a curiosity and a pliability. And so I talk about standardize and automate, but there needs to be a little bit of a pliability, right? And so what I mean by that is understanding the ebbs and flows of the demand in the market and adjusting accordingly. And if you chart your course and say, here's the North Star, but we might need to tack left and right to get to that North Star, That's the pliability that you need. If you're too rigid in your approach, you might miss the joke on the journey, so to speak. So it's a curiosity, it's a pliability, and the last thing I think for any leader, it's a level of humility. I can't tell you how many times I bump into, whether it be software leadership or MSP leadership, where if they don't have that level of humility, you end up having short legs, and it ends up catching up with you. And I think having a level of humility to understand you can't do it by yourself, and it requires a team, and that team might even be outside of your own company. I think those are the ones that have the long-term success.
Yeah. What's the most important lesson you've learned in your life?
Oh man, I honestly, teamwork. I think it's like you can't do it all yourself. Understand your strengths, understand your weaknesses, and understand the power of we. Like I say here that it's not a me culture. When I first took the job as a CEO, I was uncomfortable and had a little bit of a imposter syndrome. Actually, it's like, geez, I'm this CEO of this publicly traded company. And then you learn to embrace it and say, hey, look, stick to who you are. And too often early on, people were looking at me to set the culture. And I have an overweight level of responsibility to set the culture as a CEO, but I very much try to support, and you'll hear my team say it's a we culture, not a me culture.
Yeah.
And if you can cultivate that, now you can get a workforce that's driving a we together. And the power of we gives me goosebumps. That starts with the soccer pitch and in the offices as well. So I think that's the biggest thing. If you can embrace the power of we and empower folks, but still drive that right level of accountability, it's amazing what folks can do.
I remember seeing a meme of Boromir from Game of Thrones in a presentation once where he was doing the text was, one simply doesn't define culture. And I love that. It's always stuck with me because you don't just go and install it. It's not a piece of kit that you just go and plug in.
Some try to, but it's artificial. Sorry.
That is exactly right. And I think that hollowness of culture sometimes is the thing that people kind of run away from.
It's walking the walk. So we had an incident with the customer this week that we didn't respond to in the right way, and it got escalated to me. And I told the CEO of this customer, I said, hey, here's all the things that we did. I wanted to wait one more hour before I responded because I didn't want to talk. I wanted to walk. And so here's all the walking we did. Now, if my team is not walking the walk, let me know. And too often, I'd say the industry, both on the MSP side, but also the vendors, they're quick to the talk and a little bit slow to do the walk. And to show my team at 9:30 at night, we're going to walk now because the MSP needs us now. And to demonstrate that, and the customer was appreciative. I think you need to lead by the example, right?
Yeah. I think one of the interesting journeys of growth is getting at that edge of comfort and taking bigger risks and maybe thinking bigger, thinking in different horizons, so to speak. And I was curious to ask you if there's been an identifiable inflection point for you where you started thinking big.
Oh gosh, I go back to maybe a little bit of that imposter syndrome, and that when you hear the letters CEO or CFO or a general manager or whatever, some of these bits, and there's a perception of what that should be, and then you go back to what are the core bits of leadership and getting there, and for me. It's making sure that you have enough time to think about. I call it, McKinsey calls them the horizons. I call them value arcs, and you need as a leader to make sure that you set up enough time aside to think about different value arcs, right? And so we're often stuck in the today and in that first arc, which might be a 90-day arc or even like a 6-month or a year arc. I found when I began to have the discipline to make sure I set enough aside for not just for me, but for my team to think about that second and third value arc, the one that's maybe 18 to 24 months,
right,
and that 36 months, because you can get caught. It's such an easy trap to get caught in the today.
Yeah, it's not even around the corner; it's around 2 corners.
Yeah, and being able to do that because that enables the thinking big. giving yourself the license or the freedom to say, hey, look, it's something that I'm not going to necessarily deliver next quarter or even next year, but what is the art of the possible? And giving your team the license and dedicated time. This is what we're doing next week. Next week, it's not about 2026, it's about 2028. And what do we believe MSPs need? What do we believe small, medium businesses need? And I practiced it. I'm not sure I believed it. I knew I needed to do it.
Yeah.
I knew I needed to do it. But in my, I've been leading the business. I've been in the industry for 13 years. Been leading the business since 2016. My first couple of years, I knew I had to do it, but it probably wasn't until maybe the third year where I was like, no. It was more of an awakening as to this is the lifeblood of the future of the business. Like, let's embrace the journey. And in the first couple of years, I was focused on the outcome. What is the answer that we're going to tell the board? What is the answer that we're going to come out of this long-range planning? And what I've learned is to think big. It's the journey that actually is the goodness, and having your team kind of walk through that journey and having those discussions and deliberations. So it took us a couple of years to do it, but I feel like it's not perfect, but I feel like we're getting better.
It's a process. There's no destination.
It's a journey. It's a process. Yeah.
John, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today.
Always great.
Speaking of setting things aside, thanks for setting aside a whole 2 hours to just sit down and have this, wonderful chat.
I got to go talk to the Wall Street guys now.
Well, folks, this has been John Pagliuca, CEO at Enable. Thank you so much for joining us. We're around on Fridays at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, unless we're not, travel and all that stuff. But